Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Cybersecurity Recruiter Podcast. This one is with Gary Piper. And full disclosure, internally, we had a bit of a mess up here. This one was recorded some time ago, around 24 months ago, a couple of years back. I think we just got crazy busy, heads down in recruitment, and essentially it got missed. Massive apologies from me to the listeners for releasing this late, and to Gary as well, because Gary was a great guest on the show. But I just wanted to do an extra intro here so there was no confusion if we were mentioning stuff from a while back. Thanks again, Gary, for being a guest, and I'll let everyone get stuck into it. Finally. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Cybersecurity Recruiter Podcast. Today I'm joined by Gary. Gary, how you doing?
Hi, doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. I'm going to do you a bit of an intro for the listeners, Gary. Feel free to shout at me if I get anything wrong. Gary started back in 2003 as a graphic designer for JMG Inc., then went on to be an art director for Inner Workings, was then an art director and internet director for Fusion, and then was also a director of creative services for Cavo Kerr, and then a creative marketing director at Catapult Education, director of creative services for Planmica USA, if I'm saying that correctly. And currently, Gary is the marketing director of Black Talon Security. Gary, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Thomas.
So I'm really excited about today's show. For everyone listening, Gary's got a strong marketing background. We're going to talk about various ways on how marketing and personal branding and so on and so forth can benefit your career progression and tie that back in with the job search within the cybersecurity field. But Gary, I'll start where I always start. If you could tell me and the listeners who you are and what you've been up to in a professional capacity over the years.
Yes. So my background is originally more on the graphic design and web design side, as you can see from my past experience there with the creative services roles and art direction roles. And this is my first stepping into a position where I do have the reins over all of marketing and all the facets of marketing. So that has been an experience so far stepping into that side. I think I've always been the creative director that got their hands into too many different things within the business and not necessarily always over the creative side, but my brain also leans toward the technical side of things, which I think is also a reason why I maybe ended up in marketing for cybersecurity.
I think basically as the space becomes more and more competitive, I think the marketing side of things is becoming more and more important. I know years ago, back in the day, people could have a small pen testing firm. All the work would just come in. There wasn't the competition there is. Perhaps folks could get away with talking in really technical jargon. No one would know what they're really talking about, and they'd win business anyway. But I think times have changed, and I think that the marketing piece is becoming more and more kind of prevalent. When you came into security, have you seen that? Have you seen the marketing side need brushing up, shall we say?
I think that there are some really good marketing elements that I'm seeing in a lot of the companies. I think what has really been eye-opening to me is just within the security space, since it's so new, it's very difficult to try to figure out exactly where a lot of these companies fit with their products or solutions. And there's so many different elements to cybersecurity. I think that was definitely one thing of stepping over from the dental and healthcare side of things into cyber, trying to understand what are all the different technologies that are out there, what is in use, how are all of these different companies put together as far as the products and services that they are trying to implement for their clients, and where do we fit as Black Talon too, as far as where exactly are we trying to fit within there too. There's so many companies out there that I think are more just on the tool solution side of things, and it might be a collection of different tools, and then you have this other arm of it where it is a blend of product and service, and making sure that you also have the almost like the virtual CISO or the on-call security engineer side of things. Like, you're not just installing a tool on your network that's going to do things, but then your own internal team, whether you're using an internal IT resource or an external IT resource, they don't necessarily know what to do with that information that's coming back off of there.
Yeah, and I think as well is when it's articulated across the industry. I think sometimes when it's articulated to non-technical people, they just presume that everyone knows what they're talking about. But as soon as you step outside the security community, no one else gets it.
Right.
And I would imagine from a marketing perspective, to clearly articulate things, I'm imagining is pretty paramount.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the top things. You've got to know your story, you've got to know your why and your differentiators as the company. I think are some of the most important things that you can really solidify whenever you start into something like that.
Yeah, definitely. So talking about things being different as soon as you step outside security, I know you haven't always worked in the industry. What was the transition like into security for you? I know a lot of people listening will be trying to get into security. How was your transition, and any kind of hints and tips for the listeners on that front?
Yeah. I am definitely a firm believer of whether you're stepping into a new industry or just a new company. As a marketer, I think some of the most important things are getting up to speed with the technologies in the space, the products that are specific to your company, products and services. You don't need to understand every technical aspect of it, but you at least need to be able to speak to each of those well enough to whenever you are doing marketing efforts, but putting together marketing copy, figuring out your plan of action, you've really got to know how those fall within the space and how those technologies are positioned within your company and just within the broader industry.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And Gary, I noticed on one of we have a little show plan, whether I always stick to it or not is the question, but I noticed you said something about leveraging previous relationships and your network and stuff like that. I think that's a massive part of career transition and career development. Is that a skill set you've always naturally had, or is that something you've just had to work on over the years? Have you managed to maintain and refine and develop those key relationships in your network?
I think that's definitely something that I grew with, I would say, as I started in some of the larger organizations. A lot of the dental brands that I worked for were under Danaher Corporation was the parent company, very large, multiple operating company conglomerate. And I think that's where I really started to see the power of making sure that you are consistently networking, keeping in contact with all of those that you've worked with over those years, because you never necessarily know whenever your paths are going to cross. Again, people transition in and out of companies, in and out of industries, and you never know which connection might necessarily get you your next opportunity. Too. I know, especially with this one, it was definitely because I already had a lot of my dental industry contacts, our founders and some of our other leadership at Black Talon worked within the dental industry. And I never worked directly with anyone that was in the leadership side of things, but I had worked with a lot of other people who had worked with them too. So it's definitely all about keeping those connections, just checking in with them periodically to whether or not you were in active search mode.
Yeah, definitely. And a few key things that you said there. You said consistently networking, keeping connections, checking in periodically. I think so many people, especially in the current climate, layoffs and stuff like that, if connections have been maintained and done really well and people haven't just reached out when they needed something, if you do fall on hard times, you're probably okay.
It's at least a little easier. You're not starting from square one. So I was the casualty of a layoff actually in 2018.
Okay.
And I was definitely one of those that I did not keep up my resume as I should have. I did probably still do okay on the networking side of things, so I didn't feel like I was too hard up there, but it was difficult trying to pull together resume, portfolio, all of those elements, and just trying to recover after an 11-year stint in a very large organization, and then all of a sudden you're in layoff mode. And I checked myself out of the job market. too. And I would say definitely still keep a pulse on, even if you aren't, again, in an active search mode. I think that it's good to browse the job listings just so that you keep up with things. And especially in something as new as cyber, where positions can change, like job descriptions can change, and if you check yourself out of a job market for 10 years, things have changed a lot if you're not keeping up on it. So I think that that's just a very important thing to at least be somewhat tapped into that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think in this day and age, I think things change faster and faster. I just think that the way the world's going now, and I think always be open to talking to people, and whether it's a recruiter, whether it's me or other recruiters in the marketplace. I know some people that are really open to having conversations, and when it is time for that guy or girl to move, it's a lot easier for me, and it's a lot easier for them as well, because you've got a nice relationship. It's just dead easy.
Yeah, and there are several really creative recruiters that I've had extremely long-standing relationships with now, 2 or 3 that were always my go-to whenever I needed to build my internal team or whenever I had a transition and change out. One of those even I roped in as a personal consultant as well whenever my more recent job search felt like it was dragging on and it was never going to end. So that I could make that transition, I finally said, I know that you would do consulting for me. Can I pay you and have you assess all of my stuff and do some mock interview calls with me, or just be there to answer my questions and make sure that the path that I feel like I'm trying to go down, with taking one step back out of purely the creative side into more of an upper marketing role, is that going to be the path that it feels like I'm going to be most happiest with too? Because I think it's not only changing the industry side of things, it's also looking for that next step in your career too. And I think that whenever you're making those sort of shifts, it's good to have somebody to be able to bounce those off of.
Yeah, listen, talking it out is everything. And I think we were actually just talking about it internally earlier. I think in a remote environment, we can all overthink and we all spend a bit more time on our own. And I think, I'll say, having that sounding board and someone to give you advice and bounce ideas, I think it's massively valuable.
Yeah.
So, Gary, on to kind of personal branding and building a personal brand. Maybe if people are listening and they're at the junior end and they're wanting to get themselves out there, or maybe look, someone's been deep in the weeds and they're very technical and they've really just not put any effort at all into marketing or personal branding for themselves. Any advice for those folks listening? Any hints or tips for getting started? Anything like that?
I think the biggest thing is really just knowing your why and what makes you tick. What are your own motivators, and crafting that story around it. I think after that layoff, and whenever I actually started looking at, all right, what makes me happy in what I just left in my position there, and what do I know would not make me happy? What I really found was some of the positions that I was trying to apply to that were more in like the consumer packaged goods and very transactional sort of marketing and sales. I knew that I would not be happy in those sorts of industries. I need something that has the longer sales cycle, more of a technical, more of a high-end capital equipment sales cycle. And the marketing for that is much different than something that is going to buy a candy bar or you're going to buy your favorite brand of paper towels. That is a very different form there. I think definitely getting that side of things down gives you a little bit more direction as far as where you think that your own personal branding might go to, because you want to be able to craft that so that you are targeting those particular ideal companies that you want to work for. I think the other one is definitely knowing what your differentiators are. And I have always been one where I feel like I'm a good designer. Am I one of the best designers out there? No. And am I good with that? Yes. I have enough on the visual aesthetic side of things, but I also really enjoy the technical side of things. I dive into things like our marketing automation platform, and I can go in there. I can still do some coding. I don't enjoy doing coding. So I try to keep that to a minimum, but I do roles where it does have a lot of variation day to day. I knew that stepping into something, even where I might be in a larger organization and taking on something like a marketing operations role, I knew that it was going to be pigeonholed to almost the same day in, day out. And I knew that my story needed to be more around my flexibility between the number of things that I could provide for a company. So it was a good fit for Black Talon. They're about 6 years in here. They needed their first really dedicated marketing person that could jump right in and do a multitude of things. And I have not been bored one day since I have started here, for sure.
Good.
And it's a balance of design work. It's a balance of jumping into our HubSpot instance and setting things up and optimizing things there, working with an agency partner, and it's very different day to day. But I think once you really have those differentiators, once you really know your story, that's where you can really build from there. And coming from the visual aesthetic side of things, you do definitely need that element of it. So as much as you think that what your layout of your resume may not necessarily matter, it matters more about the content, the visual aesthetic side of that. If you do have a portfolio website, things like that, you really need to pay attention to what sort of message and brand that's really conveying to the companies that you're trying to get on board with.
Yeah, no, definitely. Impression code, mate. I didn't know you was a bit of a coder as well. That's pretty good.
A little HTML, a little. So actually, whenever I made my transition from graphic design over into a bit of the web design side of things, for a while there, I even tried to do a little like actual computer programming, and I think a C+ or C++ class. That's definitely where my brain maxed out. And I was like, all right, then now that's way too far down the technical side. Now I need to rein it back a little bit.
Yeah. Look, C++, that's pretty low level. That's pretty hardcore.
Yeah, that was not for me. Some HTML, some JavaScripting, CSS, I can handle that.
Cool. You mentioned there about sales life cycle, and you mentioned you like a longer sales life cycle. Sometimes I think with marketing and stuff like that, do you think some people don't perhaps bother with it because it is a little bit of a longer life cycle to really get the benefits? You think people want that instant hit? And how long should people give themselves in terms of timelines for getting a decent personal brand or getting a decent marketing strategy to be rocking and rolling, would you say?
You need to give yourself and we're talking to just the personal, building your personal brand. You definitely need to set with it for a while, and don't be afraid to change it. I think people change. Your career trajectory can change very quickly too. I think don't be afraid that once you actually start down that path that you can. It's with any sort of marketing. It's a little bit of trial and error. You might pull together something that you think is, oh, this is great. And then you actually start to pull together some of those elements and start to put that in front of some of your companies, and you're not getting those hits. And sometimes you've just got to take a little bit different approach to it. I see more and more with a lot of my creative friends that are trying for creative director roles and things like that. They're really stepping into things like starting up their own TikTok account specifically for the job search side of things. And it's very intriguing to see what you can do to differentiate yourself. So don't be afraid to try those sort of different methods, I think. And I don't think that's pigeonholed just to the creative community. I think that you could easily do that in other ones. And that could be a very differentiating factor if you were taking a completely different approach to your job search.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's just having the belief and setting the expectations. I know firsthand from doing the stuff with like this pod and the LinkedIn and stuff, it makes a big difference. It's interesting about the TikTok. So are they doing kind of video, the TikTok's giving them a look in first. It's giving them like a real, making the resume 3D.
Almost like the one in particular, it was basically almost like tips for creative directors. Like she was trying for her next creative role there, but it was more to give her background and expertise in multiple areas. And she actually just landed somewhere new already. And I was like, you were infiltrating my TikTok feed periodically. Somehow the algorithm got you into my feed. So it obviously works.
Yeah, cool. All right, Gary, in terms of learning resources and anything online or books or pods or anything, what's the main things that you've tapped into over the years for your career progression and self-development that could help everyone listening?
I would say a couple key things that I know that were very helpful within my career, starting from the graphic design side of things, being in a larger corporation. And I do feel lucky that I was in a corporation that really held personal development and career growth very near and dear. So they actually had an internal business system university where you could go and take courses. The two from that I would say that definitely stick out with me and that I continually reference from time to time is Crucial Conversations. I think the official book name is Crucial Conversations: Tools for Talking When the Stakes Are High. But basically that one, I believe it was probably like a 2-day course. And they have the instructors where you've got to read the book ahead of time, but then you're going through exercises for those next couple days to really hit home what the key points within the book are. And then especially in a corporate structure, I think that's definitely something that is helpful, of knowing how to drive toward consensus and what consensus is. And you don't have to have everyone on board all the time. Like that's never possible. And it's good to have some healthy conflict back and forth. You also don't want to be in a room where, the leader says this and everyone else is just a yes person. Then there's no one questioning anything. Nothing's actually going to necessarily improve. And you're not going to find ways to improve your products and your services and the company overall without having a little bit of that conflict. But I think that Crucial Conversations just really gives you a great framework to be able to work within. And especially if you're one that is a little conflict adverse too. And I would say that I was definitely more of one of those people. I think that definitely helped me in my negotiations and my typical day-to-day interactions with some difficult personalities. At times, everyone has different things happening within their lives, different ways that they react to things. And I think you've got to be generally aware of that within any corporate structure that you're in these days. The other one that I would say there was the situational leadership. That one's a Ken Blanchard program there, but I think what really drew me to that one was and by that point I had a team of 14 people or so within my creative and digital marketing side of things. So a lot of different personalities, a lot of different expertise levels in certain things. And that situational leadership, I think, really gave me a lot of the leadership essential side of things that you need to be aware of, that you can't treat everybody the same in the way that you're managing them. Everybody has different working styles, different motivators, and you've got to be able to work with them on those particular things. And you can't manage even every single project with that particular person. You've got to be able to manage in a little bit different way. Somebody may have already done a whole lot of website redesigns, but has never done a pay-per-click campaign or something like that. Everyone has their sweet spots of where they kind of gravitate toward. So you've got to be able to manage those expectations with them and making sure that they feel like it's an open communication between both sides too, because you as the employee never want to look like you don't know what you're doing for whenever you're having those conversations with your boss. And your manager doesn't necessarily always know where your head's at whenever it comes to where you feel that your skill sets are, or if you're having problems on that. Like, you need to make sure that it's a safe space for an open line of communication both ways.
Yeah, cool. There's loads of things to unpack there, Gary. And you mentioned there about healthy conflict, touched upon some leadership stuff. There's some really good stuff to get into there. On the healthy conflict stuff, I was talking about this actually offline with some internal recruiters that I spend a bit of time with. And I think in the short term, it's really hard to have that internal conflict. But I think long term, it does strengthen the relationship and kind of the respect levels are there and stuff like that. The healthy conflict thing, I'm sure a lot of people can relate to not wanting to go down that road. You mentioned that the course helped you with it. How?
If I remember back correctly, it just gives you how you need to navigate whenever you know that it's going to be a difficult conversation like that, and making sure it's a lot about taking the emotion out of it. Okay. And there is a balance to that, because you can't be completely heartless in many situations there. So that's not necessarily the answer. I think that it is removing and de-escalating whenever the emotions do start to bubble up. You've got to be able to come back to, what are we trying to get to here? We know that we're not necessarily going to agree on everything here. You might be way over here on this topic. I might be way over here on this topic. This is the business objective. This is what our roles are. This is what we are here to do for the company. And I realize that this is how you feel about this particular project or this particular whatever it is that we're talking about. And I feel the complete polar opposite. What things can we find that we do agree on between those things, and where do we need to have more of an in-depth conversation? Like, it is very much about picking apart because in so many of our interactions, there's just so many things that flow into it.
There is, and it's a real skill set. And I've been on a client call today for two really, really technical roles, and I was on the call for a long time discussing what the client wants. And I reckon 60-70% of the call was about the communication side, ability to manage the team. And this is for two really technical security roles. And it's just, I just think in the consulting world, whether it's security or any other industry, it's just becoming so important. What was it like managing a team of 14, mate? I bet that was hard work, wasn't it?
It was. Once they combined together, the two sides, it was not that large up until the last year. But that's where I was like, all right, we need to, I can't have 14 people directly reporting to me either. So some of those did flow into upper level art director roles. And I basically kind of split the company into about 5 different segments by business unit. So I had a key person within each of those verticals that I knew that I could count on, because as the company grew, as the department grew, less and less of my day was definitely doing any sort of creative or actually digital work. It was more team management. And I did enjoy that aspect of it. I am good for a while taking a pause on any sort of team management side of things and really diving back into the work that I enjoy doing. So I think that's another thing in your career trajectory. Don't necessarily think that you're taking a step back or a divergent step if you did manage a large team like that, and then you dial it back for a little bit. All of us maybe need that little pause from time to time just to regroup ourselves and to get back to doing some of the work of what we got into our particular field to do, as opposed to doing a lot of people management, a lot of red tape cutting for your team, and boiling down of the business objectives and trying to filter that into, all right, how do I execute this with my team that I have in place? Yeah. Because that can be very draining.
yeah, definitely. When it comes to leadership and management, you've got to be sure. I've done so many calls and people have said to me they're adamant they want to progress to leadership. And I'm always like, look, are you sure? Yeah, like I know a lot of recruiters probably wouldn't say that because they perhaps want to just go, yeah, great. I don't want people back on the phone in 6, 12, 18 months having changed their mind or just not happy because, look, some people embrace it and they love it and they never want to change it. That's great. But other people just try it and it's just not. It's harder than it looks, mate, isn't it?
Yeah. It was not something that I necessarily, whenever I started in lower level graphic design or even art director roles, I don't know that I ever necessarily saw myself elevating to a creative director level role and having a large team like that. But it just happened as being in a larger organization that likes to acquire a lot of different brands. And I took on a lot of different things in those early years, and I've already proven my worth to the company. So it was exhilarating, I feel like, to be able to build the team and get to that level. But that is a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that goes into that. And it can be very rewarding, but it can also be a drain too. So again, like I said, don't be afraid to take a little pause from that. If you feel like in your career growth that you just need to dial it back a little bit on the personnel oversight side of things, don't be afraid to make that move.
And you mentioned about managing different people and treating everyone differently, and I can really relate to that. If I think about the clients I've got in New York, I manage and deal with them a lot different to clients that we have on the West Coast, maybe in California or LA, and like someone in Texas again is very different from people in New York. One of my main clients is in New York, and he's very down the line, and I quite like it. In LA, it's just not like that. Any advice for managing different types of personalities and dealing with different people in teams? Maybe some people are listening and they're leading a SOC or a pen testing team or a security team in general or leading a company. Any tips, hints, and advice on that front, Gary?
Again, I think a lot of that goes back to just your networking skills and your people skills. I think that you've got to the emotional intelligence side of things, I think, completely falls into here, but you've just got to have your spidey senses up at all times, and being a good listener to all of those people. I think that's how you can really start to form in your brain of like, all right, this is how I need to deal with this particular person, or this is how this client prefers to work, or prefers even the communication method. Some people are extremely direct. Some people, they do want a little bit of chit chat ahead of time. And I think coming out of COVID, I think a lot of us are a little bit communication starved and a little human touch starved there too. We do need to make sure that we've got a little humanistic element. There are definitely people that don't need that, and that's great. You can jump right in and hop right into the topic and be very direct in your communications. But I think it's just something that you have to navigate on your own, and each individual is going to be completely different based on where they're from, what their background was like, and just a lot of their inherent personality traits.
I think that's definitely the case on the remote working thing. I was thinking no one really knows the true effects on mental health of remote working on a long term, because like I know it's like really prevalent now, but it's sometimes think, God, I'm spending a lot of time on my own, and it's nice to hear events coming back. I know before we came on air you mentioned an event, and I think the things are important, aren't they?
Yes, they are. The Chicago Dental Society meeting was this last week. I've been going since 2008 now, since I've been around the industry. Definitely took a nosedive in COVID years there. I do feel like this year was probably the first year that it felt a little more normal. Last year, still not quite all the way back there. The footprint of the show was still down a little bit. Traffic was down. And it just wasn't the interactions as normal, but I did feel like this year was back to normal. Yeah, and I'm definitely one where I would almost prefer a hybrid work environment. I am actually in Chicago here, but our offices are out in New York and down in Florida. So not really a commutable distance for me, but I am definitely one where I would prefer to have more interaction on at least 2 or 3 days, a little balance there. I don't know that I would ever necessarily want to go back to a role where it's fully in the office all the time, but
No, the on-site, the on-site remote thing. We're talking about building a personal brand and stuff like that. If you put anything about it on LinkedIn, I find it just goes crazy. It's such a huge talking point, and you've got some companies really digging the heels in. I know in general the whole on-site thing, just mirror what you said. I know a lot of the searches we're working on alongside internal talent teams are on-site roles because they need support. Most people are like you, Gary, they don't want to go in every day.
And I understand that. Like, I was split between 3 different time zones here too. So like I never had my whole team under one roof as it was. So it was a lot of Teams calls and a lot of being in our project management tool so that we knew what was going on across everything. So I was already in that mode. I was never one of those where everyone needs to be in the office all the time to be able to know what they're doing. But I do understand within certain industries and whatever that particular team is responsible for, there are times whenever it does need to be on site for some of those things. Marketing, typically, not really one of those that I feel at least has to all be in like that on an on-site team.
Yeah, I don't imagine like really experienced guys and girls on the marketing side being happy going on site every day.
Yeah.
I think I think you've got to hire for it. The way I see companies struggling is when they keep changing their minds and they've hired like junior people and then they go fully remote and then people struggle. I think if you're fully remote, you've got to hire a certain sort of person. I think it works if you're intentional about it.
Yeah. And that goes with any corporate decision too. Like, if you don't think that people are paying attention to your back and forth on some of those, we are. We know whenever you keep changing direction like that, and that gives us a little signal as far as, all right, that's totally what it's going to be like on every single decision internally there.
Yeah, definitely. So just to recap on the managing people, emotional intelligence, be a good listener, and that's harder than it sounds. I know from doing the podcast. My active listening skills have had to shoot for the roof, Gary, because you really have to listen on a podcast, and it's easier said than done sometimes. But I think as well, I think you mentioned something like almost like reminding everyone on the team that you've all got a common goal, you're all heading towards the same thing, and listening to the person, seeing it from the other person's point of view, all really helps, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. You actually just reminded me of one other book resource I will throw out there too. I believe the name of it was Coactive Professional Coaching or something like that. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But that was actually one where I took a course that was dedicated specifically to the active listening and being able to really coach, knowing when those awkward pauses, whenever you feel like you need to be able to fill some of those awkward pauses in a conversation with somebody, knowing how to keep those in there, because that's whenever they are really thinking on their own and whenever they are really relaying that information that you need, and then figuring out, all right, what do I do with that information once I've just heard whatever it is that came out of their mouth.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely get all these in the show notes afterwards. So yeah, thanks for that, Gary. Mentors, massive for self-development. Basically, who's been your mentor over the years? And for people listening, how do you get one? What's the best way to approach that kind of thing, Gary?
Yep. I know whenever I was in the larger organizations, I very much looked up to our upper level leadership and a lot of my direct managers that I am still extremely close with. And whenever I have done any of my other career transitions, or whenever I'm just having an issue that I can't necessarily figure out on my own, they're a text or a call away whenever I need to try to tap them in. And whether it's marketing specific, whether it is just general career advice side of things, they have all been extremely helpful in helping me along my path here. Generally, I would say most people are in that they want to be helpful mode. I think a lot of us are very strapped as far as the amount of hours in a day and how many other commitments that we have, but don't be afraid to reach out to people on LinkedIn too, especially if you are jumping into a new industry, there's definitely been some of the cyber people that I've tapped on LinkedIn too, of like, hey, I'm new. Can I grab 30 minutes of your time just to get your perspective of things here? I would say we're lucky, I think, to be in an era where you do have that sort of thing accessible to you. And as long as you're continually growing your LinkedIn network, joining groups and having things there, I think it's relatively easy to find some potential mentors or even getting reached out to. I definitely get taps too, as far as trying to, hey, would you be a little mentoring to me? Sure.
Yeah, no, it's true. And do you know what, Guy? I think you make a really good point there about the security community. For example, I don't want to talk badly about, say, the finance community, but I always think, say, the security community is like a different compared to a lot of industries. People are quite like, if you want to be in, you're in. If your intentions are good and you're into it and you care, I think on the whole people are pretty welcoming. And I don't know if every industry is like that, but it is noticeable in security, isn't it?
Yeah, it is definitely. And I would align that to what I was used to in the dental side of things as well. Dental is a very tight-knit community. You will see multiple people that just jump company to company. Overall, it's not as broad as just the general healthcare or medical community. So it is a little tighter one. It's also a very relationship driven business. And I think that goes back to my growth within those last 15 years or so there too, just on the realization of how important the networking side of things and just your people skills whenever it does come to that, because you are continually interacting with those same people. You never know what company they're necessarily going to be with, and just keeping those lines of communication open. It's also a very hugging industry too. A lot of industries are on the handshake, and I would say that the dental industry is the hugging side of things. I don't know that cyber. I haven't been into enough cyber things yet to know where we land.
Yeah, I think cyber's probably a bit of fist pumping and a bit of hugging, maybe. I don't know. Any more in-person events planned, or is that it for the year, for this year? Some more?
Black Talon definitely has a lot of event activity coming up, mostly within the DSO, the dental service organization side of things. So the larger corporatized dentistry chain meetings, that tends to be where we focus our efforts. And we're also actually breaking into the ambulatory surgical center market. So we're going to the show this spring for the first one.
I love how targeted you guys are and kind of niche you guys.
It is very, and again, I think it's just because of where we grew with, we knew the dental equipment and technology space, and with all of our background there, we knew how hard hit that the healthcare, but specifically the dental side too, because they still have you up against HIPAA privacy laws here in the US. So if your practice is infiltrated there and they take patient records, they know that they've got you up against that for whatever ransom that they're requesting. Unfortunately, not life or death with a lot of dental procedure side of things. And I think that the hackers have maybe backed down a little bit on the medical side, just knowing that it really screws up a lot of stuff whenever they attack the hospital and the healthcare systems. But dental's this, at least for North America, they know that they've got you up against some government potential consequences that you're probably going to pay the ransom, and you're going to pay a lot more in trying to get yourself out of a breach or a ransomware attack than what you think.
Yeah, I think when they're reaching out for help, Gary, I think a lot of people, and I tend to find the more senior you go, the more, a lot of people, once they've got to a senior level, they do want to give back to a certain extent, and some people just wouldn't ever think to reach out to them. So I think it's a bit of a quieter area to acquire a mentor and reach out to people.
Yeah, and I can see that too. Honestly, I experienced that within the creative and marketing side too. Like there are some that I reached out to and then I never really heard anything. But again, a lot of people get a ton of LinkedIn messages. So if that's your only method to be able to reach out to them, don't become a huge pest, but also don't be afraid to shoot another message and be like, hey, I just wanted to make sure, did you see this? Or could you possibly find time to, just so that we could chat?
Yeah, I think as long as you get the balance right and you're polite, I think it's cool. And you've hit the nail on the head where people are busy. I had a guest on a couple of weeks ago. She's talking about getting 400 emails a day. Like, our digital footprint's just not as big as we think these days. Like, you do have to prompt people, don't you? I've had a couple of people nudge me this morning, a little bit frustrated, and it's like, sorry, like, I'm trying. Like, it's
right.
Inboxes are busy these days, aren't they, Gary?
They are definitely. I was never up to 400, I don't think, but I was probably in the 250 daily range or so whenever it was in my prior larger organization there. It's a lot of email time. It's a lot of email, a lot of people management time, not so much doing the fun stuff.
Cool. All right then, Gary, is there anything else we need to talk about? Do you think we've about covered everything, or what do you think?
I feel like we've probably covered a very wide range here.
Yeah, it's been good, and thanks for coming on. There's definitely, I think, marketing and personal branding, I think it's becoming more and more of a thing, and people are starting to recognize. I see it in the recruitment industry as well a lot. Typically, like, recruitment companies have been just smash the phone, forget about marketing, but they are wising up.
You've got to be in front of the people that you need to be. So, as a recruiter agency, you've got to balance it between the job searchers and the clients that you want to be working with, too, making sure that you've got enough going out within your social and your marketing efforts there that keeps you front of mind, too, so that even if that company or even if that job seeker isn't quite there, they at least know of you. They've got a little bit of awareness, so whenever they do get to that point of where, all right, we need to go search for a role, or hey, I really need out of whatever company that I'm in here, I need to hop. Who can I reach out to as far as a recruiter that I'm going to trust within the space?
Yeah, I think a blended approach. I tend to find, I think we were talking about this before, Gary, when we were planning the show, but I find people are like, team use the phone and don't do marketing, or team marketing. But I think if you can pair both of them, when you actually do some outreach and people do know who you are and they've heard of it, it just makes things 10 times easier. I find it really helps.
Yeah, it's all about building that relationship slowly. You start with a little bit of awareness and adding in the credibility side of things. That's where you're going to have a much easier time if you have someone that's picking up the phone and making a call to that person, if they've at least got a little bit of touch point with your brand already, and they know who you are and what you stand for.
Yeah, definitely, especially in security, because everyone's a paranoid. We're a paranoid.
That is definitely one thing that I have had to try to wrap my head around. I do feel like I'm one that typically has my spidey senses up, but I feel like this kind of takes it to a whole new level within this industry.
Have you ever heard of something called Loom? Have you ever? It's like a video. It's like a
yes,
yeah. So I did this training recruitment course. They were like, use Loom. I was like, you don't understand. Like, no one's clicking on links in the sector I operate in, and like I tried it, and just I think I sent like 30 or 40 out. You can see when people have opened them. You probably know. Not one person had clicked on it. I was like, this is not going to work for security.
Yeah, and there's things even like QR codes for a lot of marketing efforts have flipped to QR codes now that post-COVID those have actually taken off in North America, and people understand what a QR code is. But with hackers trying to infiltrate what links those are going to as well, and people easily scanning those and clicking on something, it's a little bit of a balance of figuring out, all right, is this going to backfire or is this actually going to work within our space?
I think the rules of engagement are definitely a little different. Definitely. Thanks for coming on, my friend. Loads of value there, Gary. I appreciate your time, and thanks for coming on again. I'll see you soon, my friend.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Thomas, for having me.